We are taught from a young age to love the ending. The dragon is slain, the Dark Lord is defeated, the hero gets the girl, and the book closes with the comforting words, "All was well." But life, unlike a book, does not stop when the page turns. The sun rises the next morning. The adrenaline fades. The silence returns. And in that silence, the heroes must do something far harder than fighting a war. They must live. What happens to the boy who lived when he becomes the man who has to work? What happens to the friendships forged in fire when they settle into the quiet routine of paperwork and parenting? Tonight, we step off the page of the fairy tale and onto the platform of reality. We explore a story not of wands and duels, but of time and memory. It is a story about the shadows cast by great men and the children who have to walk in them. It reminds us that you can defeat the darkest wizard of all time, but you cannot defeat the clock. The past is never truly dead. It is merely waiting for someone to turn the hourglass. So, let us go back, not to the cupboard under the stairs, but to the station, to the steam and the noise, to the place where every journey begins and where this one continues. Hello, I'm Max. Welcome back to the magic. I'm keeping things simple tonight because I want us to get straight to the comfort. You know the drill. Find your spot. Sink into it. Imagine the air around you is turning into that thick, white steam of the Hogwarts Express. It's warm. It smells of rain and old iron. It wraps around you, muting the sharp edges of the day, blurring the worries until they are just distant shadows. Take a slow breath in, pulling in that sense of anticipation, and breathe out, letting the steam carry away everything you don't need right now. Just relax. The train is waiting. The compartment is empty. Let's see where the tracks take us. The clock at King's Cross Station ticked closer to 11 o'clock, a mundane mechanical heartbeat in a world teeming with hidden magic. It was September 1st, 2017. 19 years had passed since the Battle of Hogwarts. 19 years since the green flash of the killing curse had rebounded for the final time, ending the reign of Lord Voldemort. To the wizarding world, Harry Potter was a monument, a living legend. The boy who lived, the man who won. His face was on chocolate frog cards, his story was in history books. But on platform 934, amidst the swirling steam and the screech of owls, Harry Potter was just a dad, and he was terrified. He stood adjusting the scarf of his youngest son, Albus Severus Potter. Albus was quiet, his green eyes, so like his grandmother Lily's, filled with a turbulent mixture of fear and resentment. He looked at the scarlet steam engine, the Hogwarts Express, not as a vehicle of adventure, but as a judge. Every eye on the platform was fixed on them. Whispers followed them like a wake behind a ship. That's him, that's Potter, and that's his son. Imagine the weight of that name. Albus wasn't just going to school. He was walking into a museum dedicated to his father. How do you find your own identity when your last name belongs to the world? "Dad," Albus whispered, pulling away slightly. "What if I'm in Slytherin?" It was the question that haunted him. The Potters were Gryffindors, brave, bold, heroic. Slytherin was the house of the snake, the house of dark wizards, the house of him. Harry knelt, looking Albus in the eye. He tried to offer comfort, revealing a secret he had kept for years. "Albus Severus," he said softly, ignoring the staring crowds. "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." It was a beautiful sentiment. It was the right thing to say. But words, even true ones, cannot always shield a child from the playground. The train whistle blew. The separation began. As Albus boarded the train, he sought a compartment where he wouldn't be stared at. He found one occupied by a single boy with pale blonde hair and a lonely expression, surrounded by sweets he hadn't eaten. "I'm Albus," he said. The blonde boy looked up. "I'm Scorpius Malfoy." The silence that followed was heavy with history. Their fathers, Harry and Draco, had been enemies for decades. Their families had fought on opposite sides of a brutal war. But here, in the quiet of a train compartment, stripped of their father's prejudices, two lonely boys found a connection. Scorpius was not the arrogant bully his father had been. He was nerdy, anxious, and deeply kind. He carried a burden even heavier than Albus. Rumors whispered that he wasn't Draco's son at all, but the secret child of Voldemort, born through the use of a time turner. It was a lie, a cruel gossip, but it isolated him completely. Albus looked at Scorpius. He saw the pain in his eyes, and in a moment of quiet rebellion against the expectations of the world, he sat down. "I'll stay," Albus said. And so, the first brick of the new story was laid, not on rivalry, but on friendship. They arrived at Hogwarts. The Great Hall was just as magnificent as the stories said, floating candles, the enchanted ceiling reflecting the starry sky. But for Albus, it was a courtroom. The sorting hat was placed on his head. The hall held its breath. "Slytherin!" the hat shouted. The silence was deafening. A Potter in Slytherin. It broke the narrative. It shattered the expectation. As Albus walked to the table dressed in green and silver, he felt the disappointment radiating from the room. He felt he had failed the first test of being Harry Potter's son. The years passed in a blur of misery. This was not the Hogwarts of Harry's adventures. For Albus, Hogwarts was a place where he struggled with magic. He wasn't a natural flyer like his dad. He wasn't a brilliant student. He was just average, and an average Potter in Slytherin was a magnet for mockery. His only refuge was Scorpius. The two boys became inseparable, clinging to each other in a school that didn't understand them. They were the outcasts, the cursed children of their famous fathers. Meanwhile, back in London, Harry Potter was struggling with a different kind of magic: bureaucracy. He was now the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. His desk was piled high with reports. His scar hadn't pained him in 19 years, but his head hurt constantly from stress. He tried to connect with Albus, but every attempt ended in an argument. Harry didn't know how to talk to a son who didn't worship him. He tried to give Albus gifts, James's invisibility cloak, the Marauder's map, but Albus rejected them. They were symbols of the legacy he hated. The tension came to a breaking point before Albus's 4th year. Amos Diggory, the father of Cedric Diggory, the boy Voldemort had ordered killed in the graveyard all those years ago, came to Harry's house. Amos was old, wheelchair-bound, and bitter. He had heard a rumor that the Ministry had seized an illegal time turner, a powerful one. "Save him," Amos begged Harry. "Go back. Save my son. You're the boy who lived. You survived. Cedric was the spare. It's not fair." Harry, filled with guilt but bound by the laws of time and nature, refused. "We cannot meddle with time, Amos," he said gently. "People die. We cannot bring them back." Albus was listening on the stairs. He heard his father refuse to save a life. He saw it not as wisdom, but as callousness. He saw a hero who was too busy being important to care about the spares. And a dangerous idea began to form in Albus's mind. If his father wouldn't be the hero, he would. He would steal the time turner. He would save Cedric Diggory. He would prove to the world, and to his dad, that a Slytherin Potter could do something great. Albus enlisted Scorpius. Scorpius was reluctant. He knew the dangers of time, and he was terrified of breaking rules, but he couldn't say no to his only friend. They also found an unexpected ally, Delphini Diggory, Amos's niece and caretaker. She was older, mysterious, with silver hair and a captivating intensity. She encouraged them, validating Albus's anger. The trio escaped the Hogwarts Express, jumping from the moving train in a scene of reckless bravery, and made their way to the Ministry of Magic. They used Polyjuice Potion to infiltrate the heart of the government. It was a chaotic, clumsy heist, far from the slick missions of Harry's youth. But they succeeded. They stole the Time Turner from Hermione Granger's office. She was now the Minister for Magic, a job she performed with terrifying efficiency. With the golden device in their hands, standing in the Forbidden Forest, Albus and Scorpius prepared to rewrite history. They decided to stop Cedric from winning the Triwizard Tournament. If Cedric didn't win, he wouldn't go to the graveyard. He wouldn't die. They set the dials. 1994, the first task. Dragons. The world dissolved around them. The trees of the forest spun into a blur of colour and light. The sensation of time travel was violent, like being pulled through a straw while the universe screams in your ear. They landed in the past. They were dressed in Durmstrang robes to blend in. They saw the crowd. They saw the young Harry Potter facing the Hungarian Horntail. And they saw Cedric Diggory. Albus raised his wand. He cast a disarming charm, knocking the wand from Cedric's hand just as he faced his dragon. It was a simple spell, a small humiliation. Cedric failed the task. "We did it," Albus whispered, as the Time Turner pulled them back to the present. "We saved him. But time is not a river you can dam without flooding the valley." They woke up in the present day. Albus had been injured in the return trip, his arm broken. Harry was there, furious and terrified. But something was wrong. Ron Weasley wasn't joking with Hermione. He was married to Padma Patil. Hermione was a bitter, mean professor at Hogwarts, teaching defense against the dark arts with a cruelty that rivaled Snape. Why? Because Albus and Scorpius had humiliated Cedric. But they had also changed the subtle interactions of the past. In this timeline, because of their interference, Ron never got jealous of Hermione at the Yule Ball. He danced with Hermione instead. They didn't have their big fight. They didn't realize they loved each other. They stayed friends. Ron married someone else. Hermione, heartbroken, buried herself in work and became hard and cold. Rose Granger Weasley, Albus's cousin, didn't exist. Albus realized with horror that by trying to fix one death, he had erased an entire person from existence. And Cedric was still dead. The humiliation hadn't saved him. It had just made his last year miserable. The ripple effect was terrifying. Albus had wanted to be a hero, but he had only broken his family. And the worst part was the distance between him and Harry. Harry, frightened by Albus's disappearance and influenced by a dark prophecy from a centaur, "There is a black cloud around your son," decided that the problem was Scorpius. He banned Albus from seeing his best friend. He bullied the headmistress, Minerva McGonagall, into using the Marauders' map to keep them apart. Harry Potter, the boy who had been locked under stairs, became the jailer. He was acting out of love, yes, but love contaminated by fear is a dangerous thing. He was holding on so tight, he was crushing the boy he tried to save. Albus was now alone in a world that felt slightly off, separated from the only person who understood him. The Time Turner was still in their possession, and the temptation to fix the mistake, to try again, whispered in his ear. Just one more try, it seemed to say. Just a little deeper. But they had no idea that the water they were wading into was about to get much, much deeper. They were about to learn why time is a closed loop, and why some dead things should stay dead. The stage was set for the second jump, and this time, they wouldn't just break a marriage, they would break the world. The laws of time travel in the wizarding world had always been clear. Meddling with the past is a path to madness. But Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy, fueled by the arrogance of youth and the desperation of outcasts, believed they could outsmart the rules. They had failed once, erasing Rose Granger Weasley from existence and turning Hermione into a bitter spinster. But they convinced themselves that the error lay in their execution, not their intent. They hadn't saved Cedric Diggory. They had only changed the circumstances of his death. The logic of their mission, to prove they were heroes, to step out of the shadows of their fathers, demanded they try again. They had to fix the mistake. They had to go back. This time, the target was the second task of the Triwizard Tournament, the Great Lake, February 1995. The plan was more aggressive. Humiliation had not worked. They needed to disqualify Cedric entirely. They would use an engorgement charm on him, forcing him to float out of the water like a giant balloon, unable to complete the rescue mission. It was a crude plan, almost comical, but they were desperate. They stood in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, moaning Myrtle's domain, using the plumbing to access the lake's pipes, bypassing Hogwarts' new security measures. Delphi was there again, guiding them, encouraging them. Her presence was a constant, shadowy influence, always pushing them further, always validating their worst instincts. She didn't come with them, claiming the time turner couldn't hold 3, but her voice lingered in Albus's mind. They spun the time turner. The world dissolved again. The tiled walls of the bathroom twisted into a vortex of gold and light. They emerged underwater. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. The crushing cold of the black lake, the murky green darkness, the silence broken only by the bubbling of their own breath. Aided by gillyweed they had stolen, they swam through the swaying kelp forests, avoiding the grindylows. They saw the champions. Harry Potter, young and determined, gills on his neck. Victor Crumb with his shark head, and Cedric Diggory using a bubblehead charm. Albus and Scorpius positioned themselves. They cast the spell. It worked. Cedric began to swell. He floated helplessly to the surface, disqualified, humiliated in front of the entire school, in front of his father, in front of the girl he liked. It was a total failure. The boys watched him ascend, satisfied. They had done it. They had surely saved him this time. No graveyard, no green light. The time turner yanked them back. The water vanished. The cold remained. Scorpius Malfoy woke up alone. He was back in the lake, surfacing, gasping for air. He swam to the shore, expecting to see Albus. He climbed out onto the grass of the Hogwarts grounds. But something was wrong. The air felt different. It was heavier, colder. The sky was a bruised purple, even though it was day. The castle looked the same, yet sharper, darker. Flags hung from the turrets, but they were not the house crests he knew. They were black banners emblazoned with a dark, stylized bird. An augury. Scorpius looked around for Albus. "Albus!" he shouted. No answer. He hurried into the school. The atmosphere in the corridors was oppressive. Students marched in silence, heads down. There was no laughter, no chaotic magic between classes. It felt like a military academy. He found the headmaster's office, hoping to find McGonagall, hoping to find some sanity. He opened the door and froze. Sitting behind the desk was not Minerva McGonagall. It was Dolores Umbridge. "Professor?" Scorpius stammered. Umbridge smiled, that sickly sweet smile that chilled the blood. "Headmistress, Malfoy. Headmistress." Scorpius asked about Harry Potter. He asked about Albus. Umbridge looked at him with genuine confusion. "Harry Potter, that troublemaker from years ago. He died at the Battle of Hogwarts, Scorpius, along with the other rebels." The world tilted on its axis. Scorpius felt the blood drain from his face. Harry Potter was dead. "And Albus," he whispered. "There is no Albus," Umbridge said. "How could there be? Harry Potter died before he had children." The realization hit Scorpius like a physical blow. In this timeline, their humiliation of Cedric Diggory had worked too well. Cedric hadn't just been embarrassed, he had been broken. The shame of floating like a balloon, of being the laughingstock of the wizarding world, had turned his heart cold. His anger had festered. He hadn't become an Auror or a simple wizard. He had joined the Death Eaters. And in the Battle of Hogwarts, it was Cedric Diggory who killed Neville Longbottom. Think of the dominoes falling. Neville never killed Nagini. Voldemort remained immortal. Harry Potter sacrificed himself in the Forbidden Forest, but this time he stayed dead. Voldemort won. Scorpius was now living in a world ruled by the Dark Lord. He walked through the castle in a daze. He saw the changes. The mudbloods were gone, purged from the school. The remaining students were purebloods, trained in the dark arts. Muggleborns were hunted in the dungeons for sport. For Voldemort and valor was the greeting in the halls. And Scorpius. In this world, Scorpius Malfoy was a king. He was the Scorpion King, the most popular boy in school, a sadistic athlete who tormented Muggleborns. He was everything his father had wanted him to be, and everything the real Scorpius hated. He had power, status, and fear, but he was utterly alone. Albus was never born. His best friend didn't exist. This section of the story is a masterclass in horror. It's not jump scares. It's the quiet horror of a world where love lost. The Dementors patrolled the skies freely, breeding despair. The Ministry of Magic was a totalitarian regime dedicated to the preservation of pure blood. Scorpius knew he had to fix it. He was the only person in the entire universe who remembered the world of light. He was the anomaly. But he was just a boy, terrified and alone, surrounded by monsters who thought he was their leader. He sought out help. He needed the resistance. But who was left? Harry was dead. Ron and Hermione were fugitives, the most wanted wizards in Britain. But there was one man, one teacher, who in every timeline, no matter how dark, played a dangerous game. Severus Snape. In this reality, Snape had survived. He was still the potions master, still seemingly loyal to the regime. But Scorpius knew the truth of the original timeline. He knew Snape was a hero. He gambled everything on that knowledge. He went to the dungeons. He faced Snape. And he told him everything. He told him about Harry. He told him about Albus. He told him about the doe, the Patronus, the love for Lily Potter. Always, Scorpius said. Snape, the man of iron control, cracked. He believed the boy, because only the truth could sound that impossible. Snape took Scorpius to the secret headquarters of the Resistance. It was a humble room hidden beneath the roots of the Whomping Willow, and there Scorpius met the last remnants of the army of Dumbledore, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. They were not the golden couple. They were scarred, battle-hardened warriors. Hermione was wanted for acts of terrorism against the Dark Lord. Ron was her lieutenant. They weren't married. In this timeline, the war had consumed everything. But the love was there, simmering under the surface of their shared trauma. Scorpius explained the time turner. He explained the mistake with Cedric. They realized they had to go back again. They had to stop Albus and Scorpius, their past selves, from casting the spell on Cedric in the lake. They had to ensure Cedric finished the task, died in the graveyard, and history resumed its tragic, necessary course. It was a suicide mission. The Dementors were swarming the grounds. They sensed the disturbance in time. They moved to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, near the lake. But the Dementors descended. The air froze. The happiness was sucked from their souls. Hermione stepped forward. She knew she wouldn't make it. She looked at Ron. "I love you," she said, finally admitting in the darkness what she hadn't said in the light. Ron stood beside her. He raised his wand. They didn't cast Patronuses. They were too exhausted. They cast shields, buying time for the boy. "Go!" Ron shouted to Scorpius. "Fix it!" The Dementors descended on Ron and Hermione. They kissed them. Their souls were taken. They died together, holding hands in the dirt, sacrificing their lives for a world where they might never meet, but where the light would win. Then Snape stepped forward. The Dementors turned to him. Snape looked at Scorpius. "Tell Albus," he said, his voice quiet. "Tell Albus Severus. I'm proud he carries my name." Snape cast his Patronus. A silver doe burst from his wand, driving the Dementors back for a few precious seconds. He was consumed by the shadows, so that the son of his greatest enemy could live. Scorpius dived into the lake. He activated the time turner. He went back to the moment of the second task. He saw his other self, the one from the first trip, hiding in the reeds with Albus. He cast a blocking spell. He stopped the engorgement charm. He intervened in his own interference. Cedric Diggory completed the task. He surfaced. He lived to die another day. The water spun. The time spun. Scorpius surfaced in the lake again. But this time, it was the present day. The real present day. "Albus!" he screamed, coughing water. And from the surface, a boy's head popped up. Albus Potter, alive, Slytherin robes, green eyes. "Whoa, Scorpius, you okay? You've been under for ages." Scorpius grabbed Albus and hugged him. He hugged him like he was drowning. He was hysterical. The world was back. The flags were the house colours. Harry Potter was alive. Ron ran a joke shop. Hermione was minister. It was messy, imperfect, and beautiful. But the ordeal wasn't over. They had lost the time turner in the lake. It was gone. They confessed everything to Harry, to McGonagall, to Hermione. Harry was furious, but also relieved. He hugged Albus, truly hugged him, for the first time in years. They thought it was finished. They thought the nightmare was over. They had learned their lesson. Time is not a toy. The past is sacred. But they had forgotten one player. Delphi, the silver-haired girl who had befriended them, manipulated them, and urged them to change the past. She wasn't just Amos Diggory's niece. That was a lie. Amos didn't have a niece. Scorpius realized it first. He remembered the dark timeline. He remembered the augury symbol, the bird of prophecy. Delphi had an augury tattoo on her neck. In the dark world, the augury was the symbol of Voldemort's right hand. They weren't dealing with a grieving relative. They were dealing with a fanatic. Delphi appeared in the room. She wasn't the clumsy, shy girl anymore. She revealed her true power. She locked the doors. She snapped wands. She took Albus and Scorpius hostage. "You didn't go back far enough," she hissed. "Humiliating Cedric was a child's game. We need to go back to the beginning." She had a new time turner, the true time turner. The one they thought was lost was a prototype. She had the golden master. She revealed her lineage. She wasn't a Diggory. She was the daughter of Bellatrix Lestrange and Lord Voldemort. Born in secret at Malfoy Manor before the Battle of Hogwarts, the heir of Slytherin. Her plan wasn't to save Cedric. It was to save her father. She grabbed the boys. She spun the time turner, but she didn't aim for a tournament. She aimed for a specific date, a date etched in every wizard's memory. October 31st, 1981, Godric's Hollow, the night Voldemort went to kill baby Harry. She was going to stop him. She was going to warn him. She was going to prevent the curse from rebounding. She was going to ensure that the Dark Lord survived the night that destroyed him. Albus and Scorpius were dragged back into the vortex. They landed in a quiet village in the autumn of 1981. They could smell the wood smoke. They could see the church. And on the hill, they saw the house, the Potter house, with the lights on. And inside, James and Lily Potter were putting their baby to bed, unaware that death was walking up the garden path. The boys were trapped in the past, without wands, with a dark witch who planned to rewrite the foundation of their entire world. And back in the future, Harry Potter sat in his kitchen, staring at an empty chair, feeling his scar prickle with pain for the first time in 22 years. He knew she was back, and he knew his son was in the center of the storm. The final battle would not be fought at Hogwarts. It would be fought in the shadow of a cottage in Godric's Hollow, where the story began, and where Delphi intended to end it. The fathers had to find their sons, and Harry Potter had to face the one moment in his life he had spent decades trying to forget. The moment his parents died for him. He would have to watch it happen, and he would have to do nothing. Because to save the world, Harry Potter had to let his parents die, again. In the logic of fairy tales, the hero defeats the villain, the world is restored, and peace reigns forever. But time travel is not a fairy tale. It is a math problem where changing a single variable alters the entire equation. Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy, two boys driven by the desire to fix a tragedy, had meddled with variables they did not understand. They had believed that by saving Cedric Diggory, they were performing an act of kindness. They did not realize that tragedy is often a load-bearing wall in the architecture of history. Remove it, and the roof caves in. When Scorpius Malfoy surfaced from the Black Lake after their second attempt to alter the past, he emerged into a silence so profound it felt like a weight on his chest. He was alone. Albus was gone. The world around him was familiar in its geography. The castle, the lake, the forbidden forest, but alien in its soul. The air tasted of ash and ozone. The sky was a bruised purple, devoid of the warm Scottish sun. Scorpius walked into the castle, his robes dripping on the stone floor. He expected detention. He expected a shouting match with McGonagall. Instead, he found a military academy. The students marched in lockstep, their faces devoid of joy. The house colours were gone, replaced by severe black robes. The chatter of portraits was silenced. The staircases didn't change. They were fixed in rigid, efficient lines. He found the office of the headmistress. He pushed open the door, desperate to find an adult, to find order. He found Dolores Umbridge. The woman who had once tortured Harry Potter with a blood quill was now the supreme authority of Hogwarts. She looked at Scorpius, not with disdain, but with deference. "Scorpion King," she called him. The conversation that followed shattered Scorpius's reality. He asked for Harry Potter. Umbridge laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Harry Potter died 20 years ago, Scorpius, at the Battle of Hogwarts. The boy who lived didn't." The dominoes clicked into place in Scorpius's mind, a horrifying sequence of cause and effect. By humiliating Cedric Diggory in the second task, they hadn't saved him. They had broken him. The embarrassment had festered into hatred. Cedric, the golden boy of Hufflepuff, the embodiment of fair play, had turned to the Death Eaters for revenge. And in the final battle, it was Cedric who killed Neville Longbottom. Without Neville, Nagini, the final Horcrux, was never killed. Voldemort remained immortal. Harry Potter walked into the forest to sacrifice himself, and he stayed dead. The resistance crumbled, the light lost. Scorpius was now living in Voldemort Day. The horror of this timeline wasn't just in the big details, the statues of the Dark Lord in the atrium, the Dementors patrolling the skies, but in the small ones. Mudbloods were hunted for sport in the dungeons. The curriculum was dedicated to dark magic. For Voldemort and valor was the common greeting. Compassion was considered a weakness, cruelty was a virtue. And the worst part for Scorpius was looking in the mirror. In this world, Scorpius Malfoy was not a nerdy, anxious outcast. He was a prince. He was popular, feared, and athletic. He tortured Muggleborns. He was his father's perfect son, the ideal of pure-blood supremacy. He had everything he thought he wanted: acceptance, power, status. But the price was his soul, and he was utterly alone. Albus Potter had never been born because Harry Potter died at 17. Scorpius, terrified and isolated, knew he had to act. He was the only person on the planet who remembered that things were supposed to be better. He carried the memory of sunlight in a world of endless grey. But who could he turn to? The Order of the Phoenix was decimated. The Weasleys were dead or in hiding. He remembered a story, a rumour from the history books of the original timeline. Severus Snape, the man who played both sides, the double agent who loved Lily Potter. In this world, Snape was still alive. He was still the potions master, a trusted servant of the regime. But Scorpius knew the secret heart of the man. He knew the password to his loyalty. He went to the dungeons. He found Snape brewing potions in the dark. Snape looked at him with cold suspicion. "What do you want, Malfoy?" Scorpius didn't beg. He simply told the truth. He told him about a world where Harry Potter lived, where Voldemort was dust, where Albus Severus Potter was named after the bravest man his father ever knew. Snape paused. His mask of indifference slipped for a fraction of a second. "Named after whom?" "You," Scorpius said. and Dumbledore. He told Snape about the doe, about the love that never died, about the promise of always. Snape, a master legilimens, looked into the boy's mind. He saw the memories of a timeline that shouldn't exist. He saw the truth, and for the first time in decades, Severus Snape allowed himself to hope. He took Scorpius to a secret room hidden beneath the roots of the Whomping Willow. This was the headquarters of the Resistance, and there, Scorpius met the ghosts of a future that never happened. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, they were unrecognizable. Ron wasn't the jovial owner of a joke shop. He was scarred, limping, his eyes hard as flint. Hermione wasn't the Minister for Magic. She was the most wanted criminal in Britain, a warrior queen leading a desperate guerrilla war. They weren't married. In a world this dark, there had been no time for romance, no space for softer feelings. They were comrades in arms, bound by survival, not love. But when Scorpius told them about the other world, the world where they had a daughter named Rose, where Ron made jokes, where Hermione made laws instead of bombs, he saw something break in them. He saw the what-if wash over their faces. They formulated a plan. They had to go back. They had to use the time turner, which Scorpius still had, to stop his past self from humiliating Cedric. They had to intervene in their own interference. They had to ensure Cedric died in that graveyard so the world could live. Think about the heroism of that decision. Ron and Hermione were agreeing to restore a timeline where they might not be soldiers, but where their friends would be alive. They were fighting for a world they would never see. They moved to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, near the lake, to perform the jump. But the shadows were waiting. The Dementors, sensing the concentration of hope, descended. The air turned to ice. The happiness was sucked from the world. Dozens of cloaked figures glided down from the sky. They were trapped. Hermione stepped forward. She knew the end had come. She looked at Ron. In this timeline, they had never kissed. They had never admitted their feelings. But facing the void, the truth spilled out. "I love you," she said. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was a simple fact. "I know," Ron said. He stood beside her. He raised his wand, not to attack, but to defend. "Go!" he shouted to Scorpius and Snape. "Fix this!" Ron and Hermione stood back to back. They didn't cast Patronuses. They were too exhausted, too bereft of happy memories. They cast shields of raw magic, buying seconds with their lives. The Dementors descended. The kiss was administered. Their souls were taken. They died together, holding hands in the dirt. The last spark of the resistance extinguished. Scorpius and Snape ran. But the Dementors were not satisfied. They turned their hunger toward the remaining two. Snape stopped. He looked at Scorpius. "You have to do this alone, boy." "I can't," Scorpius cried. "I'm just a kid." "You are a Malfoy," Snape said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "And you are the only hope left." The Dementors swooped. Snape raised his wand. He closed his eyes. He thought of green eyes. He thought of a red-haired girl laughing on a playground. He thought of Lily. "Expecto Patronum!" A silver doe burst from his wand. It was brilliant, blinding, a creature of pure love in a world of hate. It drove the Dementors back, creating a circle of light. "Go!" Snape roared. "Tell Albus! Tell him I'm proud he carries my name!" Snape held the line. He was consumed by the darkness, so that the son of his greatest enemy could have a future. Scorpius dived into the lake. He spun the time turner. He went back to the second task. He saw his other self hiding in the reeds with Albus, preparing the spell to humiliate Cedric. Scorpius cast a shield charm from underwater. He blocked the engorgement spell. He sabotaged his own sabotage. Cedric Diggory completed the task. He swam to the surface. He lived, which meant he would go on to the third task. He would take the cup. He would go to the graveyard. He would die. Scorpius surfaced in the lake. He gasped for air, his lungs burning. He looked around wildly. The sky was blue. The flags waving from the castle were red, blue, yellow, and green. Students were laughing on the grounds. Scorpius! A head popped up beside him. Black messy hair, green eyes. Albus Potter. You've been under for ages. Are you okay? Scorpius grabbed Albus and hugged him. He hugged him so hard they almost both drowned. He was sobbing. He was hysterical. You're alive! You're alive! Albus was confused, pulling away. Of course I'm alive. Why are you wet? Why are you crying? Scorpius dragged Albus to the shore. He looked for Harry Potter. He found him in the headmistress's office, McGonagall's office, not Umbridge's. Harry was furious about their disappearance, but he was there. He was shouting. He was alive. He was stressed. It was the most beautiful thing Scorpius had ever seen. The world was back. Ron ran the joke shop. Hermione was minister. Rose existed. It was messy, imperfect, and wonderful. Scorpius confessed everything. He told them about the dark world. He told them what Ron and Hermione did. He told Harry what Snape did. Harry Potter sat in silence, listening to the story of the man he hated, and then respected, and now owed his son's life to. He wept. They thought it was over. The time turner was lost in the lake during Scorpius's return. They were grounded for life. They promised never to meddle with time again. But the story has a way of twisting just when you think the page is turning. Scorpius and Albus were cleaning their dormitory as punishment when Scorpius mentioned something odd. In the Dark Timeline, he said, they called the augury the daughter of the Dark Lord. Albus paused. The augury? You mean Delphi? Delphi Diggory. The older girl who had befriended them, who had encouraged them to steal the time turner, who had an augury tattoo on her neck. She had claimed to be Amos Diggory's niece. But Amos didn't have a niece. He and his wife had no siblings. The blood drained from Albus's face. Delphi wasn't helping them save Cedric. She was using them. They sent an owl to Harry, but it was too late. Delphi appeared in the room. She wasn't the clumsy, shy girl anymore. She dropped the act. Her voice was cold, high, and terrifyingly familiar. She locked the doors with a wave of her hand. She snapped their wands like twigs. You didn't go back far enough, she hissed. Humiliating Cedric was a child's game. We need to go back to the beginning. She revealed the truth. She was not a Diggory. She was born in secret at Malfoy Manor in the months before the Battle of Hogwarts. Her mother was Bellatrix Lestrange. Her father was Lord Voldemort. She was the heir of Slytherin, the ultimate legacy. And she had the true time turner. The one they stole was a prototype that only went back 5 minutes. She had the Golden Master, capable of travelling years. Her plan wasn't to save Cedric. It was to save her father. She grabbed the boys. We are going to a place where we can fix everything, she said. She spun the time turner. The room dissolved. The years unspooled like thread from a reel, faster and deeper than ever before. 2017, 2000, 1990, 1981. They landed in a village. It was night. The air smelled of autumn leaves and wood smoke. There were pumpkins on the porches. A church bell rang in the distance. Albus looked around. He recognized the village from pictures. He recognized the cottage at the end of the lane. Godric's Hollow, he whispered. The date? Scorpius asked, terrified. What is the date? Delphi smiled. October 31st, 1981. The night Harry Potter became the boy who lived. The night Voldemort fell. Delphi's plan was simple and horrific. She would wait for her father to arrive. She would warn him. She would tell him that attacking the baby would destroy him. She would tell him about the love protection. She would stop him from casting the curse. Voldemort would survive the night. He would raise his daughter, and the world Scorpius had just escaped, the world of dust and darkness, would become the permanent reality. Albus and Scorpius were trapped in 1981. No wands, no help, just two teenage boys standing in the shadow of the most famous murder in history, with the daughter of the devil holding the gun. And back in the future, Harry Potter felt his scar burn. A sharp, searing pain he hadn't felt in 22 years. He fell to his knees in his kitchen. Ginny ran to him. "Harry," she cried. "What is it?" Harry looked up, his face pale with a horror that transcended time. "He's back," Harry whispered. "Or, someone is back. And they have Albus." The fathers had to find their sons. Draco Malfoy, who had a secret golden time turner of his own, a family heirloom he had kept hidden, arrived at the Potter house. The old enemies, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Draco, had to unite. They had to go back to 1981. But they weren't just going to fight a witch. They were going to face the ghost of their own trauma. Harry Potter was going back to the night his parents died. And to save the world, he would have to do the hardest thing imaginable. He would have to watch it happen and let them die. Again. Godric's Hollow, October 31st, 1981. To the wizarding world, this date is a holiday, a celebration of freedom. But to stand in the village on that specific night is to stand in a graveyard before the funeral begins. The air is crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant, muffled laughter of children trick-or-treating. It is a scene of utter domestic normality, which makes the impending horror all the more grotesque. Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy stood shivering in the shadows of the churchyard, watching the cottage at the end of the lane. They could see movement in the window, a woman with red hair, a man with glasses, Lily and James Potter, alive, happy, unaware that the clock of their lives had less than an hour remaining. Delphi, the daughter of Voldemort, was somewhere in the village. She was waiting. Her plan was surgical: intercept her father before he entered the house, warn him of the prophecy's trap, and change the course of history. If she succeeded, the curse would not rebound. Harry Potter would die as a baby, or perhaps live as a non-entity. Voldemort would reign eternal. The reality of the future hung by a thread, suspended in the cool autumn air. But help was coming, arriving not on broomsticks or thestrals, but through the fabric of time itself. In the future, Draco Malfoy had revealed his secret. He possessed a true time turner, a masterpiece of forbidden magic kept by his family for generations. It was a device of gold and starlight, capable of traversing decades. The old guard, Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, and Draco, joined hands. They spun the dial. They fell through the years, landing in the same village, on the same night. The reunion between fathers and sons in the churchyard was not a moment of scolding. It was a collision of relief. Harry held Albus, realizing how close he had come to losing him not just to death, but to time. Draco held Scorpius, dropping the mask of cold aristocracy to reveal a father's desperate love. But the warmth was fleeting. They realized the trap they were in. Delphi was powerful, fueled by fanaticism and dark arts. To stop her, they needed to surprise her. They needed to draw her out. They realized Delphi was waiting for Voldemort, but she had never met him. She only knew his legend. This gave Harry an idea, a terrifying, dangerous idea. He would transform. He would use transfiguration to become the Dark Lord. He would lure Delphi into the open by pretending to be the father she desperately sought. It was a performance that required Harry to inhabit his deepest nightmares. As his features shifted, as his skin paled and his nose flattened, he felt the coldness of Voldemort's soul brush against his own. He walked into the village square, a figure of living shadow. Delphi emerged from the darkness. The scene was heartbreaking in its twisted way. She did not attack. She fell to her knees. She was a girl who just wanted to know her father. She pleaded with him, told him of the future, warned him of the boy. Harry, struggling to maintain the illusion while looking into the eyes of Voldemort's child, felt a strange pity. She was a monster, yes, but she was also an orphan, driven by the same longing for connection that had defined Harry's own life. But the illusion broke. The disguise faltered. Delphi realized the trick. The duel that erupted in the church of Godric's Hollow was primal. It was not a duel of school children. It was a fight for existence. Bolts of light shattered the pews. The stained glass windows exploded inward. Harry, Ginny, Draco, Ron, Hermione, the heroes of the past, fought alongside Albus and Scorpius, the heroes of the future. It was a generational battle, the old and the new standing against the legacy of hate. They overpowered her. Delphi was bound, her wand taken. She screamed that she only wanted to see him. Just once. And then the real silence fell. The air grew cold. A high, cold presence entered the village. The real Lord Voldemort had arrived. He walked down the lane, his snake Nagini slithering beside him. He did not look at the church. He did not see the battle that had just happened. He was focused on his destination, the Potter cottage. Harry Potter stood by the window of the church, watching the monster walk towards his parents' house. This was the crux of the entire journey. This was the test. To save the world, to save the future, to ensure that Albus and Ginny and everyone he loved continued to exist, Harry had to let it happen. He had the power to stop it. He could run out there. He could curse Voldemort in the back. He could save James. He could save Lily. He could have the parents he had mourned for 37 years. But he couldn't. He stood frozen, tears streaming down his face, his hand gripping Ginny's hand so hard his knuckles turned white. Albus stood beside him, watching his father watch his own tragedy. For the first time, Albus understood the weight of the name Potter. He understood that being the boy who lived meant being the man who had to let them die. It wasn't a title of glory, it was a scar of survival. They heard the blast of the door. They heard James shouting, "Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Go, run. I'll hold him off." They heard the green flash, the silence. James was gone. Harry flinched, a physical spasm of grief. Then they heard Lily, her voice, clear and terrified, pleading not for herself, but for her baby. "Not Harry, please no. Take me, kill me instead." Harry squeezed his eyes shut. He was hearing his mother's murder in real time. He was hearing the act of love that created the magic that protected him. It was the most intimate, painful moment of his life, and he had to endure it as a passive witness. They heard the second green flash. The scream cut short. And then, the silence. The cry of a baby. It was done. History was preserved. The timeline was secure. The scar on baby Harry's forehead was fresh, and the scar on adult Harry's soul was ripped open anew. Voldemort's body was destroyed by the rebounding curse. He fled as vapor. The heroes of the future stood in the church, surrounded by the wreckage of the fight and the wreckage of their hearts. They took Delphi prisoner. They prepared the time turner to go back. They left 1981 behind, leaving the bodies of James and Lily to be found by Sirius Black and Hagrid, leaving the story to unfold exactly as it was written in the history books. They returned to 2017. The transition was smooth. The world was normal. The sun was shining. But they were different. The experience had scrubbed away the resentment between Harry and Albus. Albus had seen his father not as a remote icon, but as a wounded man. He had seen the sacrifice that built his life, and Harry had seen Albus not as a disappointment, but as a brave, fierce boy who was willing to fight for his friend and for the world. Scorpius, too, was changed. He had walked through hell and come back with his soul intact. He had asked Rose Granger Weasley out on a date, and she hadn't said no, only looked at him with pity, which he took as a win. He was no longer the son of Voldemort in the eyes of the Whispers. He was the boy who saved the world. Life returned to its rhythm, but the ending of this story doesn't happen with a fanfare. It happens in a quiet place, a place of green grass and grey stone. A week later, Harry took Albus for a walk. They didn't go to a Quidditch pitch or the ministry. They went to a hill, a beautiful green hill overlooking the countryside. It was a place Harry didn't visit often. It was the grave of Cedric Diggory. Harry stood before the stone. He didn't have magic words to fix the past. He simply wanted to be there. Albus stood beside him. "I didn't save him," Albus said quietly. "I tried, but I couldn't." "You can't save everyone," Harry replied. "I learned that the hard way. But you tried, and that matters." Harry turned to his son. He looked at him, really looked at him, without the lens of expectation or fear. "I think I'm going to be a lot more me," Harry said, struggling to find the words. "And a lot less Harry Potter. And I hope you can just be Albus." "Albus is good," the boy said. "I like Albus." Harry pointed to the sky. "The thing about time," he said, "is that it changes you, but it doesn't have to define you. Those names you have, Albus Severus, they are heavy names. Great men with huge flaws. Snape was brave, but he was also cruel. Dumbledore was brilliant, but he was secretive. You don't have to be them. You just have to be the best parts of them. Or you can just be yourself." Albus looked at the grave. "I'm sorry, Cedric," he whispered. The wind blew across the hill. It was a gentle wind carrying the scent of rain. Harry put his arm around his son's shoulder. Albus didn't pull away. They stood there, two wizards, father and son, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The scar on Harry's forehead was just a white line now. It didn't hurt. It hadn't hurt in a long time. "It's going to be a nice day tomorrow," Harry said. "Yeah," Albus agreed. "I think it will." The story ends not with a battle, but with a walk home. It ends with the realization that the greatest magic isn't stopping death or turning back time. It's the ability to forgive yourself for being human. It's the ability to heal. And as they walked down the hill, their shadows stretched out long before them, separate at first, but merging into one as the twilight deepened. The cursed child was no longer cursed. He was just a child, and the boy who lived was finally, truly living. The transition from the blood-soaked earth of 1981 back to the polished wood floors of the present day was instantaneous, yet spiritually jarring. One moment, Harry Potter was standing in the shadow of a church where his parents had just been murdered. The next, he was standing in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, the golden statues gleaming under artificial light. The physical journey was over. The time turner, that seductive and dangerous device of gold, was confiscated, destined to be destroyed or locked away in the deepest vault of the Department of Mysteries. Delphi, the Auguray, the orphan of the dark, was taken away. She did not leave with the cackling triumph of her father, but with the desperate, broken sobbing of a child who had reached for a legacy and found only iron bars. For the wizarding world, life resumed its chaotic, colourful rhythm. The daily prophets spun stories, the bureaucrats shuffled parchment, and the students of Hogwarts returned to their exams and their Quidditch matches. But for the small circle of people who had stood in that churchyard, Harry, Albus, Scorpius, Draco, Ginny, Ron, and Hermione, the world had shifted on its axis. They walked with the quiet, heavy gait of soldiers returning from a secret front. They carried a knowledge that isolated them. They knew how fragile the present really was. They knew how easily the light could be extinguished by a single moment of grief or hubris. Scorpius Malfoy returned to the Slytherin dungeons, but the shadows that had dogged his steps for his entire life had finally evaporated. The rumours of his parentage, the whispers that he was the son of Voldemort, were silenced forever. The truth of Delphi's existence had acted as a cleansing fire. Scorpius was no longer the cursed child of the playground gossip. He was simply Scorpius. A boy who liked books, who was awkward around girls, and who had, quite literally, saved the universe. There is a quiet victory in his return to normalcy. He found the courage to approach Rose Granger Weasley in the corridors. He didn't win her heart in a single moment. Life is not a movie. But he earned a smile, a crack in the ice of her prejudice. For a Malfoy and a Weasley to simply talk without malice was a magic more potent than any spell. Scorpius had learned that he didn't need to rewrite his family's past to build his own future. He just needed to be kind. But the heart of this story was never really about Voldemort, or time turners, or grand battles. It was about a father and a son trying to bridge the gap between two very different islands. Weeks passed. The leaves on the trees turned from the gold of autumn to the skeletal grey of early winter. Harry Potter went to work. He signed papers. He led the auras, but his mind was constantly replaying the scene in the church. He saw Albus watching him. He saw the look of realization on his son's face when the killing curse struck. He knew that the wall of resentment Albus had built against him had cracked, but cracks can either be repaired or they can bring the whole house down. One afternoon, Harry travelled to Hogwarts. He didn't go as the famous alumnus or the head of law enforcement. He went as a dad. He found Albus, and together they took a walk. They didn't stay in the castle. They walked out past the Quidditch pitch, past the edge of the Forbidden Forest, hiking up a steep, grassy hill that overlooked the valley. It was a beautiful, clear day. The Scottish sky was a piercing blue, the kind of blue that hurts the eyes. The climb was silent at first, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the frost-hardened grass. It was a silence not of anger, but of preparation. They were climbing towards a conversation that was 19 years overdue. At the top of the hill stood a simple stone marker. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a monument. It was the grave of Cedric Diggory. Harry had not visited this place often. It represented a guilt he had carried since he was 14 years old. The spare who died because he was in Harry's orbit. But today, he brought his son here. It was an act of surrender. By bringing Albus to Cedric's grave, Harry was admitting that the past could not be fixed. They couldn't save Cedric. They shouldn't have tried. All they could do was honour him. Albus stood before the stone. He looked older than his years. The baby fat was gone from his face, replaced by the sharp angles of someone who has seen the dark timeline. He stared at the name carved in the rock. He didn't cry. He just breathed, accepting the weight of the reality. He apologized to the stone, a whisper carried away by the wind. He apologized for using Cedric's memory as a pawn in his own game of rebellion. Harry stood beside him, hands in his pockets, looking out over the lake. He didn't try to play the hero. He didn't offer platitudes about how death is the next great adventure. He offered something much rarer, his own inadequacy. He spoke to Albus not as the chosen one, but as a frightened man. He admitted that he was terrified of the dark. He admitted that he didn't like small spaces. He admitted that he had a phobia of pigeons, small, human things. He dismantled the pedestal Albus had been forced to look up at. He showed his son that the great Harry Potter was just a collection of fears and luck and stubbornness. He told Albus the hardest truth of all, that he didn't know how to be a father because he had never had one. He was improvising. He was trying to read a map in the dark without a wand. He confessed that he had looked at Albus and seen his own mother's eyes, and that had terrified him because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to protect that legacy. Albus listened. For the first time, he didn't hear a lecture. He heard a confession. He realized that his father's overbearing nature, his strictness, his mistakes, they weren't born of disappointment. They were born of panic. Harry Potter wasn't disappointed that Albus was in Slytherin. Harry Potter was terrified that the world would eat his son alive, just as it had tried to eat him. Albus looked at his dad. He saw the grey in his hair. He saw the lines around his eyes. He saw the scar on his forehead, which was now just a scar, not a lightning rod for evil. "I think," Harry said, searching for the words, "that I'm going to try to be just Harry, not the boy who lived, just Harry, and I hope you can just be Albus." Albus nodded. The knot in his chest, the one that had been tightening since the sorting ceremony, began to loosen. "Albus is good," he said. "I like Albus." They stood there for a long time as the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. The castle of Hogwarts glowed in the distance, a beacon of home. It was no longer a prison of expectations for Albus. It was just a school, a place where he had a best friend. a place where he learned potions, a place where he belonged. Harry put his arm around Albus's shoulders. Albus didn't flinch. He leaned in, just a fraction. It was a small gesture, microscopic in the grand scheme of the universe, but it was the most important victory Harry Potter had ever won. He hadn't defeated a Dark Lord. He had won back his son. The curse of the cursed child was never a spell. It wasn't a prophecy. The curse was the silence between generations. It was the weight of unsaid things. It was the expectation that the children must pay the debts of the fathers. And on that hill, in the quiet wind, the curse was broken. Not by magic, but by honesty. Harry touched his scar. It was cool to the touch. The pain that had flared up when time was broken had vanished. The connection to Voldemort was severed. The past was finally, truly, in the past. "It's going to be a nice day tomorrow," Harry observed, looking at the clear horizon. "Yeah," Albus said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "I think it will." They turned away from the grave. They walked down the hill together, their shadows stretching out long before them on the grass. Two wizards, one Gryffindor, one Slytherin, one famous, one finding his way. They walked back towards the castle, towards the warmth of the great hall, leaving the ghosts on the hill to rest. The war was over. The childhood was over. And for the first time in a long time, the future was an unwritten page, waiting to be filled not with great deeds, but with a good life. And so we leave the hill. We leave the castle and the ghosts of the past. You know, the thing that stays with me about this story isn't the time turners or the alternate realities. It's that final, quiet admission on the hill. It's the idea that our heroes don't stop being human just because the credits roll. They grow up, they get tired, they make mistakes with their kids, they get scared of pigeons. And I find that incredibly comforting. We spend so much time worrying about whether we're living up to a legacy or whether we're doing enough. We look at our pasts and wish we could go back with a time turner and fix the things we broke. But this story tells us that the fix isn't in the past. It's right here. It's in the messy, imperfect present. It's in saying, "I'm sorry and I'm trying." Harry Potter didn't need to be the chosen one to save his son. He just needed to be a dad. And Albus didn't need to be a Gryffindor to be brave. He just needed to be himself. Maybe we can take that into sleep tonight. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have it all figured out. The scar doesn't have to hurt forever. Tomorrow is going to be a nice day. Not because it's magical, but because it's yours. Rest easy now. The train has reached the station. You're home. Good night.